So the new Imaginarium Theatre for March has just came out, and honestly, I'm gonna say that it is mostly pretty easy if you do have the right units and strategy, which we will be going through in this guide. Now, before we get into it, a quick disclaimer as always. I'm gonna assume that you have enough units to run each of the respective difficulties, and your characters are going to be decently invested. Now, don't complain about not having enough units built because there are different difficulties tailor-made for those with less units built in their account, and here's a visual I made or a table that I made to show you which modes will fit based on how many characters you have. Of course, you also have the 6 starting principal casts or opening casts that you're going to get that you have to run. You can either run your own or you can pick between the 6 free ones, so at the very minimum you can at least do the easy mode. Now, let's get straight to the actual thing. The elements for this month is going to be Hydro, Electro, and Cryo, making the possible reactions between Electrocharge, Freeze, and Superconduct. Now, if we get to the cast, the 6 opening casts which are mandatory to pick between the units that you do own, or the trial version are Kamisato Ayato, Raiden Shogun, Eula, Ororon, Layla, and Barbara. While the special casts, which are characters that ignore the elemental restriction but can only be brought if you own them in your account, are Yume Mizuki, Navia, Toma, and Shin Yen. So to start off with the general tips, number 1 is that use supporting casts if you don't have enough characters and you need help. This would be helpful if you do have like in-game friends with really well-built characters, or maybe you need a specific character to kind of complete your team or your runs. So generally try to use supporting casts if you really do need the help. Number 2 is that prioritize picking up characters over buffs, because generally if you don't pay attention, not having enough characters, at least minimum of 4, means you can't do the challenge, which will lead you to fail and you have to force you to restart. If you don't know how much characters you have or which one you haven't picked up, go check up in the details tab down in the bottom left section over here, and if you do have enough characters, you can start considering getting buffs, which will be explained in a separate section later. Number 3 is always choose weaker enemies for an easier time. I will provide examples with the visuals that I made to kind of not waste your time for that, so don't worry too much about it. Number 4, try to throw away your weaker or less invested units in earlier acts like Act 1 to Act 2, maybe Act 3, because this allows you to save your stronger or well-built units for later challenges. Now let's jump straight into the act. So for the recommended enemies, I made separate visuals for all the non-boss acts, so let us go over them one by one. Now, we'll start off with Act 1. The best challenge that I can recommend is definitely the Ruin Grader, Ruin Drake combo, because you only really have to deal with one of each, and they're Act 1, so they're quite weak. You can even run your Eula Superconduct, and I'm pretty sure you'll be able to clear with the star just fine. For the other options, the Fontaine Robot and the 2 different robot gangs, there are more enemies, but they're not exactly impossible. You can run them, but if you do get the best one, if you do get the Drake Grader combo, I do recommend that over the others. The Hydro Pyro Slime combo as well as the Spectres are doable, but annoying, and we do have Hydro Slimes and that are basically immune to Hydro, and Pyro Slimes immune to Pyro, so if you do run any of those respective units of the element, they're going to be straight up immune, making your damage basically invalidated, so I don't recommend the bottom 2. For Act 2, the 2 best ones is going to be the Fluid Avatars of Lava and the Breacher Primus. On screen right now is the method for you to group them both up together, which is simply just start the challenge and then either run all the way to the left or to the right, wait for some time once they feel like they're close enough for the grouping, and then you can immediately just go to them, do damage, and you're good. For the other options are okay. The Operative Fatui gangs and the Fontaine robots, they're not bad. You just have to deal with more enemies than usual, but it's not impossible, so they should be a fine option. And we do have the High Pressure Assault with the Natlan Warriors. They're not too particularly tough. You do have to deal with, I believe, about 8 to 12 of them. Maybe 12 is the later one. But if you do want that 20 extra flowers, you can definitely go for the challenge. Now for Act 3, we do have the Jadeplume Terrorshroom, and you only have 75 seconds to clear the chamber, but that's not going to be that much of a problem. It does have relatively high Dendro resistance, but that's not very relevant because we can't even run Dendro in the first place. And it does have a mechanic relating to Electro, where you build up the bar right beside its health. With Electro, once it's enough, it has a chance to do one of 3 moves. Now, most of those moves won't really matter. You're not going to get like one-shotted or anything. This is not the Abyss. But if it does do the charging one, my personal recommendation is that you let it do the first charge. And for the second charge, if you play Circle Impact, you can wait for it to come back to you. Or if you're not playing Circle Impact, when it does the second charge, you can immediately go to the wall that is nearest to it, so that it allows you to kind of just like set up your abilities there later on, and at least minimize the charging distance. Otherwise, there's nothing special about this boss. Straightforward, kill it, then we move on to Act 4. So Act 4, I forgot to write this down, is the Monolith defense. Now, your best option is going to be the Secret Source Automaton, the Hunter Seeker, or the Natlan Robot. It does have a mechanic with the whole Night Soul Blessing thing, but you're playing Monolith defense, so it shouldn't really matter too much. And you only have to deal with one of them per wave. So you can technically run a pacifist run, as I've mentioned in the previous guides. Your second best you have is definitely the Fatui gang, which they only spawn like one of each in adjacent, so they can only have like 2 Fatui enemies at a time, so you can technically take care of them one by one, or you can also kind of pull the aggro and try to do a pacifist run, but otherwise it's a pretty good option. Now the ones in the middle here, the Spectres and the high pressure robot gang and the regular robot gang are pretty annoying. I've done my runs, and even if you can technically get the star by keeping the Monolith above 35%, they are going to be a little bit annoying to deal with, especially because they spawn very spread out and they tend to have range attacks, so it's hard for you to really pull the aggro, so I don't recommend between these few. Spectres should be okay, but similar case, they take a while to die, and you don't want them to die next to the Monolith because they'll actually do damage. And of course, the last one, we do have the high pressure defense, which will give you extra flowers. Feel free to try, but we don't really have a Nemo this time around, so I highly recommend just taking the top 2 and just move on with it. For Act 5, we do have a few options. The 2 best ones are definitely the Saurian gang, although it's a bit inconvenient because you have to kill like I think about 12 minimum, 10 to 12 minimum, and then 15 for the star. So they're not very tough. They spawn in a clockwise manner like that. But if you really want to save time, my recommendation is the other one, which is the Nobushi Kairagi gang, which they only spawn in like waves of 3. They're particularly weak. You can just bring Beidou or something, or use Electro Charge. It's really easy. Now, for the second options, we do have the Mimic gang on top of the Tenebris Mimesis. Tenebris Mimesis, I don't have much to say. You either run Electro Charge, or you run enemies or units that hit really fast, apply elemental hits really fast, or you simply just do not do the challenge. Because breaking their shield, if you don't use Electro Charge or certain units like Cloran, Ororon, or Setlali with Night Soul, then breaking their shield is going to be a bit annoying, but the enemies themselves are not very tough. The mimics are very much doable, just a bit more annoying and a bit more time consuming. If you only have Hydro DPS left like Nuvilette or Ayata or whatnot, then they're basically useless, so I don't recommend picking up the mimics at all. The Geo Rifthounds will cause corrosion, so you might want to try bringing a healer, but the theater gives you so much HP that I don't think you'll be able to die unless you somehow like stood there and took like damage for whatever reason. And of course, we do have the high pressure assault, all with the Natlan warrior, the elites of their respective clan. They're quite easy. You only have to kill like 4 or I think 6 to 8 of them, so they're very much straightforward, very easy, free flowers if you want to get it. So for Act 6, we do have the Emperor of Fire and Iron, the Fire Crab, with a 70-second timer. Now, its resistance is relatively high when it starts, and keep in mind that whenever you start the challenge, it will begin with an attack known as Ambush, at least unofficially named as Ambush, where it will immediately try to do a jump into a slam, so be sure to dodge it if you don't want to get staggered and you don't want to feel irritated. Otherwise, it will have a Pyro crown above its head, which is very difficult to hit by a lot of Hydro units because the crown itself is quite elevated vertically. Now for that, I do have a few Hydro units that I can recommend for you to actually make your life a bit easy. So for the units that can actually hit crown, I would say Furina, Nuvilette. I can't be sure about Sidrin because I don't have Sidrin. Nilou, I don't think Nilou can hit it. Maybe she can, maybe she can't. I don't really run Nilou because why would you run Nilou outside of Bloom? Candice actually cannot hit it because her burst height is not actually that tall. Yelan and Xingqiu obviously cannot hit it. I think Mona's burst can hit. Ayato has a massive AoE, definitely can hit the crown. Kokomi with her charge attack, I think her jellyfish also can hit it to a certain extent. Tartalia's Riptide's amazing, I don't have much to say about that. And if you don't have Kokomi, you could also alternate to Barbara's charge attack. So if you do want to break that Pyro Crown, be sure to use these strategies and use whichever you may see fit. It will also do certain moves where it will basically dig itself into the ground, which makes the crown much easier for you to hit. So you can also wait for that in order to, just basically put it in a weakened state. Of course, Hydro is the best element. You can also run Electro, but preferably, like I mentioned, the crown's height is higher than usual. So use the right abilities in order to help your clears become much easier. Now for Act 7, the best one I would say by far is definitely the Secret Source Automaton Hunter Seeker combo with the Husk Knights, as well as the Cryo Operatives or the Fatui Operatives duo. So the grouping, I'll show the footage on screen right now, but to basically make it simple, when you start off, you're going to be greeted with the 3 Husk Knights. You want to go to the most left where the Cryo Archer is. The Hydro Lancer and the Pyro Flag Bearer will eventually go towards you. So if you run Frozen, you can probably use that to use your Ayaka Burst, take care of all 3 of them at once, but generally focus on the Cryo Archer because the other units will come to you. Afterwards, there'll be the Hunter Seeker spawning. That one is pretty straightforward. I don't have anything much to say. The Fatui Operative, there's no real strategy either. They only spawn one at a time, so once you kill them both, you basically are kind of done. For all the other options, the Fontaine robots are okay. You have to deal with a few of them, but not challenging enough for it to really be something worth worrying about. The Hydro or Pyro Lecter prefers you to have between Hydro and Electro in order to break the shield. And there is the grouping technique. I think I'm going to put up the footage right now where you can use certain abilities in order to break the poise, like Xingqiu Burst I think would work. Yelan Burst, I'm not too sure about that, where you can basically try to push them towards each other. So by the time you bring them to phase 2 or the shield phase, they'll basically be right next to each other, which makes it much easier for you to break them at the same time. Of course, it will drop this Pyro Ring, which you can break with the right elements, and it will basically remove quite a good portion of their Pyro Shield. We do have the Electro Rift Hounds, which, like I said, you don't really need a healer. You're gonna have so much HP that you're probably never, or it's impossible for you to die. But if you can, try to bring an Electro unit in order to build up its state where it becomes super aggressive, does more moves. However, it basically has negative Electro resistance, which means they take more Electro damage. I've tried the Ultimate Husk Gang combo with the 4 Xuanyuan Beasts. Now, the strategy is going to be quite similar with the footage playing right now. You start off with the Xuanyuan Beast, you basically just go to the nearest one, preferably try to run Perma-Freeze to play around the whole mechanic that these creatures have. Kill all 4 of them at the same time. The other 3 Xuanyuan Beasts will eventually come to you. After you take care of them, the second wave is going to be the Husk Knight. Now, because at your current position, when you go for the nearest Xuanyuan Beast, the Cryo Archer is going to be right next to you. So similar strategy with the previous thing that I mentioned. Go for the Cryo Archer. The other 2 will definitely come to you alongside with the Geo guy. Once you take care of the Cryo Archer, if you happen to kill him really fast, go to the opposite side to go for the Pyro Flag Bearer, because once again, Hydro guy will come to you, Geo guy will come to you. Eventually, you'll be able to take care of all of them at the same time. And we move on to Act 8. Now, Act 8, we do have the Polychrome Fatui Legend, particularly the Pyro Gunner and the Electro Hammer variant, where you would have about 70 seconds in order to clear this challenge. My recommendation for this boss is to basically bring a freeze team and you should be good to go. Now, the strategy of what you want to do is you want to start the chamber and I guess you could say wait a little bit. Wait for them to turn on their shields and try to go to the right side to the Pyro Gunner and make sure you face him towards the Electro Hammer. This will basically make him dash back towards his friend, which allows you to do grouping much easier, and you can do your setup if you're running a freeze team. So once you set up your freeze team, the rest is basically history. I, of course, do not recommend running a team without these 2 elements, minimum Hydro to break the Pyro Shield and Cryo to break the Electro Shield, because otherwise it's probably going to be very difficult for you to take care of them without breaking their shield down. But other than that, everything is pretty straightforward, and there are certain buffs that will help with elemental application that I will go over later. Now for Act 9, we do have the Bounty section. The 2 best challenges that you can pick is between the Kairagis, which you only have to kill 2 or I believe 3 of them, but generally it's only 2 Kairagis. They're pretty straightforward. And then of course the 2 Ruin Drakes, the Flying and the Earth Guard variant. They're very simple. From my experience, you only have to kill 2 of them with these 2 options, so if you want to save a lot of time and make life easy, you can always go for them. Now for the other options, we also do have the Electro Rift Hounds once again. But of course, you don't need healer. They prefer Electro, they take more damage. I wouldn't really recommend them because they do fly around a little bit and they tend to get a bit annoying. So yeah, it's just annoying, so I don't recommend this one. Pyro Abyss Mages, I highly advise against it because unless you have really strong Hydro application and a good damage for your team, you're going to have to deal with killing, I believe, 8 Pyro Abyss Mages. I think they spawn either 2 per wave or 1 per wave. So you're going to have to spend quite a bit of time, and while it's not impossible, you can bring Hydro or Electro, I advise against it because it's kind of just a waste of time and just straight up annoying sometimes. So the Hydro Phantasm, you can't bring Hydro because you do 0 damage. However, they can be frozen and you only have to kill 2 of them. So it's really a matter of element check. I wouldn't say it's difficult, but just don't bring a Hydro unit if you want to do actual damage. The Tenebrous Mimesis with the Hilichurl group I don't recommend either because they take forever to break the shield. Even if you have Electro Charge, you have other easier options. Why would you try to make your life hard? And of course, we're going to go for the last act. So for the solitary Suanni, I've mentioned this in my Abyss guide. This guy is basically in both the Abyss and the Imaginarium Theatre. I think Hoyo is kind of shilling for Suanni for whatever reason. I don't know, maybe they got a new hire or something. Jokes aside, the strategy is pretty similar. He does have the freeze mechanic, and after this I'm going to show you guys the attack pattern, because he does actually have quite a fixed attack pattern that you can exploit to your advantage. Of course, I highly recommend running a freeze-based team, and if you want to run a Hydro DPS, there will be buffs that allow you to shred its hydro resistance, but keep in mind that your damage is not going to be as much as you want it to be. So once again, as I mentioned, we're going to do a live demonstration of the Suanni attack pattern, second time after the Abyss. So generally the Suanni has a very fixed attack pattern, which you can kind of just play around. And of course, I do highly recommend bringing Cryo, because why would you not? So right now, he usually starts off with doing the regular attacks. Now I'm going to slow down a bit to actually show it, and then afterwards it's going to try to do the Wind Blade attack or the Water Blade attack. And I believe around here, if you're lucky, it might do like one extra move, but I don't think it will. So freeze it right here and then break it, and then you have another like 10 to like I believe about 15 seconds or whatnot. So for the purpose of it, I'm just gonna chill and just attack normally. I don't want to kill it too fast because we're not gonna do a proper demonstration. Afterwards, it has a chance of, if it's low enough, it'll probably do like the super move attack, or otherwise it'll probably do like one extra attack. And then right now, this is your chance to basically trigger that. And then yeah, basically it has a chance to trigger like this Hydro lunging attack. You can apply Cryo at that given moment and stun it for the next 10 seconds. And now I'm gonna go do this again and show you like a full demonstration without any sort of interruption. So it starts off by getting up. Let me set up all my abilities. And then it's going to be doing its own thing, and then it'll start doing the first attack, and then it'll do that slam. Usually it always opens up with that specific attack. So if you want to get it to do the super move, you do need to bring the health down to like 70%. This will be doing the Wind Blade move, I believe. So now all you really have to do is kind of relax. If you can bring it down to 50% HP, you might be able to basically like get one extra move, but otherwise just bring Cryo whenever it does this move. And you should be good to go. I don't know why it's not breaking. And then you have another 10 seconds up to your disposal. Now for that purpose, I'm going to try to lower it down a bit before I actually kill it, because I'm pretty sure I'm this close to basically overkilling it. So let's not attack anymore, because it's probably going to lose like quarter of its health. It's going to do one extra attack, usually the same attack that it usually does for the first move. And then give it a bit of time, and then it's going to start off with doing this. There's also the lunging attack I mentioned just now, but we're going to wait for a bit. And then it's going to start off by doing the wind attack. You can see the area below it change. And then all you have to do is break these 3 orbs with PHEC, Pyro, Hydro, Electro, Cryo. And then it will be broken. And then the rest is basically history. So like I don't really have anything else to say. But yeah, just rinse and repeat. Ideally try to bring Cryo if you want to have a good time. But other than that, just do your abilities. I missed the star, but it's fine. That's definitely on purpose. And then you're kind of good to go. You do have quite a bit of time. There you go. So for the Brilliant Blessings, there isn't really a best buff or a best reaction based on what they're able to give from what I can find. It's just a matter of which one you prefer over the other. So we're going to start off with Electro Charge. So level 1 Origin, whenever you trigger Electro Charge, you basically get like boosted Electro Charge damage. So that's really all there is to it. Level 2, we do have basic Drift Thunder and basic Thundercloud. So Drift Thunder summons this little ball thing that basically fires 3 bullets every few seconds, which is like whatever, I guess. It doesn't really do much outside of damage. Level 2 is basic Thundercloud, where it does 2 things. So let me just tab it out to this home DG screen that I have. So basic Thundercloud, what it does is that whenever the Electro Surge buff is active, it creates a thundercloud like a massive black cloud above the sky, which randomly uses one of the 2 following attacks every 2 seconds. The Thundercloud Strike, where it does electro damage in AoE, and the active character regains 2 flat energy, or Thundercloud Rainstorm, which does AoE hydro damage, and the active character is healed for 5%. And obviously this is the better one compared to the other, simply because it either gives you flat energy on healing, as well as AoE damage. Level 3 enhances the base Origin, so it doesn't really matter. Level 4 has 4 different paths. So Extreme Rainstorm and Extreme Thunderstrike does a similar thing in the sense of like, when you pick either one of these, it basically guarantees the Thundercloud attack to be of that nature. So Extreme Rainstorm will guarantee the Rainstorm attacks, buffing the damage as well as increasing the healing that it provides. Thunderstrike will basically guarantee the Thundercloud strikes, and they will shorten the strikes by 1 second. And I think there's another thing that it also does, I believe. yeah, it only decreases the interval between the strikes, which means you can potentially get more energy restoration. So obviously these two are pretty good. You can choose between one or the other, whether you want healing or not, or whether you want a bit more energy restoration. The other two is a bit special, where Extreme Multi-Core, whenever the Electro Charge buff is active, you get one extra ball that helps you shoot more Electro Bullets. I guess that's kind of whatever. The Extreme Beam is pretty funny and interesting. It basically changes how Drift Thunder works. Instead of firing 3 bullets, it basically summons or rather it creates an AoE Electro Explosion, which even if they call it a beam, it's more of an AoE Electro Explosion. And from what I could see, the damage would range from roughly 15k to like 19 to 20k every 1.5 to every 2 seconds. So if you do need a bit of damage, Extreme Beam is the way to go. Now Frozen. So Origin, whenever you apply Frozen, it gives the debuff, and they basically take more cryo and hydro crit damage. So it's less of them buffing your actual crit damage and more so to say the enemy just takes more damage in terms of crit. So we have two different power-ups at level 2, Coldstream Bite and Rime Rupture. So Coldstream Bite, basically if you trigger a Frozen, it does AoE of the corresponding element. If you use a Cryo character to trigger Frozen, you get a Hydro AoE. And the same applies vice versa. If you apply Hydro to trigger Frozen, Cryo instance will be unleashed. Rime Rupturing is more of the damage-centric one, where it applies another debuff that basically reduces their Hydro and Cryo Rest Shred. I believe this goes all the way to... It goes all the way for 6 seconds and maximum 3 stacks, so you can gain up to 24% Hydro and Cryo Rest Shred. Now level 3 is the evolution. I believe it just increases the crit damage by another 10%, so rather than 40% now you get 50%. And then of course Frozen once again has 4 different paths. We have the more of the AoE centric stuff, and then we have the buff centric abilities. So Acute Cold Snap, whenever the AoE thing that happens from this part triggers, you basically do 2 additional instances, basically more instance of damage. Foremost Fidget Flurry basically increases the AoE of those attacks and decreases the trigger interval from the base 6 seconds to 3 seconds. This is more of like your team doesn't have damage, so you want to have more like Cryo or Hydro application, bigger AoE and more damage, so this is kind of the path that you take. The other two is similar nature. Whenever the enemy reaches the maximum Rime debuff, which is the Rest Shred debuff, so your 3 stacks max, whenever they have the max stacks applied or for the debuff and you hit them, the character will deal 50% cryo damage for Ravaging Rupture, 50% Hydro if you choose Ravaging Runoff. This is obviously the more damage centric one. Once again, this one is very dependent on whether you want more instances of damage or you want to buff your own corresponding damage, so I trust your judgment to pick the buffs accordingly. And lastly, we do have Superconduct, which is kind of probably the weakest out of the 3, even though I said there was no real strong ones. So Superconduct Origin, whenever you trigger Superconduct, you basically apply a debuff, which will shred their Cryo, Electro, and Physical Rest Shred with a maximum of 6 stacks. So you can get up to 18% Cryo and Electro Rest Shred, and then you can get a maximum of 36% Physical Rest Shred. Level 2 once again splits into 2 different paths with Surging Bombardment and Low Resistance Linkage. So Surging Bombardment is basically the true damage buff you get from like the Abyss. You trigger physical on enemy affected by the Superconduct debuff, you get more stacks and you get basically the true damage buff, which is, you know, if you go against, like, it doesn't really matter, it's a small AoE thing. Low Resistance Linkage. For every debuff stack that you have on the enemy, each stack will increase the Cryo and Electro damage dealt to that specific opponent. I think the maximum could be like 3 or something. Let me see if I can find it. Oh, it just says 8%. Okay, I guess there's not really much to it. And of course, Superconduct Evolution. I think Evolution it increases the thing by a certain amount, but it's a very minor buff. That's something you get along the way. And of course, the last path has 4 different options, which is either between Cryo and Electro or just mostly buffing physical. So Charge Storm, whenever the opponent reaches the max 3 debuff stack, you get the Electro AoE, and Winter's Reprise is essentially the same thing, but it unleashes AoE Cryo. Once again, this is more of a damage or elemental application thing, so it doesn't really do much to you. It's nice to have extra damage, but it's not necessarily the best thing that you can pick. Now, the other two is mostly the physical focus one, Systematic Collapse and Systematic Shock. So Systematic Collapse is just give you like physical damage bonus for every stack you have on the enemy. So that's kind of like Eula, I guess. And then Systematic Shock, after you do physical damage to enemies with the max debuff, you get a stronger AoE, I believe. Yeah, the Surging Shock unleashed from the initial level 2 will have 100% increased damage and bigger AoE. So overall, I think between the 3 buffs, Superconduct is easily the weakest one. Frozen is probably the best one, honestly, because it directly buffs the characters and it does pretty good AoE application in terms of the elements. So it's really nice. Out of the three, I think Frozen is the best. Electrocharge is already a pretty strong reaction. These buffs are quite situational. You can either pick between having more instances of damage, or you can just pick for like one or the other. It's more, honestly, Electrocharge is probably the better one, and then Frozen is probably the one with the best buff. Otherwise, I think that's it for the Brilliant Blessing section. Anyways, I hope you guys found this guide to be helpful. This detail this time around is quite easy, so I assume that most people wouldn't really have that much of a problem. And I would say the buffs for the elements this time around is definitely much more underwhelming than whatever Vaporize had to offer in the previous theater. However, I think it's very much doable, granted that you know what you're doing, and I hope this guide video kind of opens up your eyes on what to expect and what to choose when it comes to your theater runs. Other than that, I think that does it for this video. I hope you guys found this helpful, and as usual, if you enjoyed the video, give this a like, and if you want to stick around for more theater and Abyss guides, be sure to subscribe, and I'll be working on other guides that could be something that a lot of people haven't done in a while, so try to look forward to that. Other than that, I wish you the best of luck in your future runs and your future endeavors. This is Ethereal, signing off. Peace out.